Ready to go. Hi, everyone. I'm Ramon Roche, General Manager for Dronecode Foundation, which is part of the Linux Foundation. Welcome to the Space with Linux Special Interest Group update. The Space with Linux initiative started last spring, I guess, incubated under the Aerospace Work Group. Thank you, Matthew Weber, and everyone at the Aerospace Work Group for having us there. We recently forked into the special interest group, and we now have our own homepage, mailing list, and everything. And we had our first meeting a few weeks ago. The Space for Linux initiative is an effort to try to create a Linux distribution for the space industry. A lot of folks came together and realized that there was a shared need for OS that encompassed all of the requirements they had. This was a thought back then, and we've done a lot of work, which I'll be presenting in the next slides, to try to narrow it down to a base where we could all contribute to and make sure that we're all under the same goals. There's been a lot going on, even though it's a very new initiative. And yeah, we're excited to present it to you. I wrote down the goals on the Space Grid Linux SIG and also the effort behind it. So if you want to take a quick screen grab of that. The Space Grid Linux SIG has been hosted by Dr. Ivan Perez from NASA Ames Research Center and myself. Bit background on myself, I've been in the robotics industry for the last decade, a bit more than that already, actually. And I realized there's a lot of common ground in robotics with space effort, and I wanted to jump in and help. Space was always a big interest of mine, and I thought the ELISA project was a great place to have these discussions and to sort of capture the right community to push this forward. So I'm happy to be here. All right, so let's talk about some of the achievements we've had so far. And I'm going to be looking at this side because I have my screen on this side. So, and my slides are, my camera's on this side. So we started as part of the work group, Aerospace Work Group, as I already mentioned. So thanks again to the Aerospace Work Group for having us, and for all the Aerospace Work Group members that are still being part of the SIG meetings. So thank you so much. So we kicked off the effort by creating a quick survey, which I will be presenting in the next slides, where we put to test the theories that we had behind the SIG formation. We also hosted the first in-person meeting last December at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. Then out of those conversations, we created the first repository where we're going to start contributing on shared distribution for a Linux distribution. And then obviously like I already said, we kicked off the meetings. So there's a lot of efforts going on this SIG. So to begin with the SIG, these were the areas of interest that we narrowed down and that we wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page with us. And for this, we launched a survey. So we thought that a space for Linux distribution should worry about a configuration. So everyone wanted to make sure that we had a predefined starting point for Linux distribution. We also wanted to make sure that the bootloader and updates were taken into account with all the safety implications that come with this. And then also in the user space, we want to take a deep look into what sort of processes we're running on Linux on the space missions. And out of this, we formed a formation survey. I don't know if there's a link to the slides so everyone can follow, but maybe if I can put it in here, someone can help me share this. And then you can click on the surveys and then you can get the full survey results. So I handpicked 4 of the results of the survey. There's around 25 questions in there, ranging from certification to what are the apps you're running for machine learning and some of the user space stuff. But getting started, we wanted to know who was actually using Linux to run space missions. This could be to actually run the rockets or the vehicles that went into space, or as a payload that went into in those missions. It turned out that more than the majority were already using Linux, and so that was a great win. We also asked them, what are the areas where you're most interested in having this shared discussion for the SIG and the Linux distribution? And it turned out that there's a lot of agreement into all of them. So bootloaders, remote updates, kernel configuration, user space, and then one that actually wasn't in our initial thought was emulation and simulation, which was really good to see. And so this was already a good learning. The next survey result I wanted to present is for the space aerospace. Are you currently deploying for a manned mission, an uncrewed mission, or both? So turns out that the majority are on uncrewed missions. Only a small percentage of those are for crewed missions, and then there's also both crewed and uncrewed in there. So the majority already, we can see that there's unmanned. The next one is, how are you actually assembling the OS that you're running in those missions? And the results here are very interesting. So to begin with, the open source builder installer for Linux distribution is the majority of the responses, but there's also a lot of proprietary and vendor installations. And then also custom versions that were interesting to discover this. So what this tells us is that there's a lot of need. If you map this with the previous slides, there's a lot of need in kernel configuration and making sure that the Linux distribution is very specific to what they need, but they're also using the open source builder installer. So that tells us that if we provide a new version to do this, that provides access for them to do what they need to do, we will be serving them better. And lastly, the last slide I have on the survey results is, are you currently using any of the flight software stacks or applications on the user space in Linux? And it turns out that there's a big majority using CFS. Space ROS is also in there, and then F prime. There's also CubeOS, and then the majority was actually other. If you go to the actual survey results that I linked on the slides, you'll see the list of all the other responses, which are very interesting to see. All right, so as a conclusion, the survey really helped us assess that the theory that we had was actually correct, and that we were all under the same page and that we were ready to get started. But honestly, the conversations that we had during the first workshop were what actually led to the beginning of the first repository and actually the formation of the SIG and forking out of the aerospace workgroup. So our friends at NASA helped us host our meeting. So I want to thank Michael Monahan and the rest of the NASA team for hosting us at this NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. We had around 30 people joining us at the meeting, and then more than 40 in virtual. It was a 2-day event. Kate Stewart, Philip Hammond was there. And then we had around, what is it? Sorry, I have it in here. 18 talks, 20 speakers with conversations ranging from certification, radiation space, considerations under that. And we came out of that knowing exactly where to start the SIG efforts. So it was a really great effort, and I want to thank everyone for participating. Stay tuned for the next events that we're going to be hosting and other space events hosted by other communities where we will be participating. Just a quick testimonials from the post-event survey. More than 37% of the attendees were already ready to get started contributing code. So that was very encouraging to see. And then more than 57% thought the content was exceptional. There's a link in there to the ELISA directory where you can actually see the schedule and links to the slides and the videos. So please make sure to check that out. All the videos are also available on the ELISA YouTube channel under a playlist for the workshop. So feel free to check those out. And then lastly, as a result to everything that's been happening, so the initial meetings in the aerospace work group, the survey, the in-person meeting. We finally have a repository where we are going to start contributing on a Linux distribution. So the team decided that we're going to get started with a Yocto-based Linux distribution. We initially had conversations on the best practices, making sure that whatever we're going to be doing there is aligned and everyone can contribute. There's a lot of considerations to be had. There's a lot of employees of different companies that have some certain restrictions. So we discussed those during the SIG meeting, and we finally decided on licensing. So we're going to be using MIT for the repository, and then Creative Commons for the documentation. We also decided on having a developer certificate of origin for this repository to make sure that everyone, all of the contributions are going back to their respective developers. The next steps on this actually starting to contribute with the Yocto distribution. If you go there, it's actually an empty repository, which is the licensing, but that's on purpose. Under the next meeting, there's already other repositories and there's branches out there where they're ready to start sending pull requests. So we start having those discussions in the SIG. We want to be mindful of everyone's time and making sure that the repository actually captures what we said that we were going to capture. As the next steps, we want to be, as I said, continue to work on this repo. Hopefully, we're going to get to build this distribution soon. We want to be finding prototyping hardware. This is one of the other challenges that we haven't discussed yet. We want to make sure that we have a hardware that we can basically call it a developer kit that is accessible for everyone, that it's not thousands of dollars in price range. We want to make sure that's something that anyone can buy, pick off the shelf and run this, but it's also actually something that eventually could even be deployed. So those conversations are happening during the SIG, and the last one we already kicked off the conversation. Hopefully we can have a demo working by the end of the year. I'm going to be pushing hard to get everyone on the same page on that. And lastly, we want to find more like-minded developers and organizations that want to help contribute. So if you're out there looking at this effort and thinking that you can contribute, please join the meetings. The next meeting is on February 20th. It's 8 a.m. Pacific, but there's a link under the ELISA community meetings page where you can actually go and see all of the meetings, and you can subscribe to them, and you'll get notifications on those. Please look at the ELISA community repository for the Space Grid Linux, where we are putting all the meeting minutes. We're tracking all the community action there. There's also a mailing list, the Space Grid Linux mailing list. Everything can be found under the ELISA website if you go there. So the submenu community, there's a Space Grid Linux landing page in there with links to the formation survey, the events, and also the mailing list. So lastly, don't forget to check out those videos. And yeah, that's it for the Space Grid Linux, and happy to take any questions. And please let me know if I'm not seeing the questions. Q&A, here we go.
Heard the one. What Yocto release were you planning to use?
Actually, that's a good question. I'm not tracking that on top of my mind right now. But I can likely figure that out. Yeah, I'll get back to you on that one, Rob.
Do you already have specific, I mean, you said like you're looking for hardware and you will have more requirements if you want to have hardware which is getting deployed, but I also heard that people brought the Raspberry Pi into space. So would this also be an option, or do you look more for specific parts, specific hardware?
I think that was discussed as an option, but they were looking into more robust hardware. So I think there was a BeagleBone version that was interesting to the group.
Cool. Okay, any further question? You can also raise your hand and unmute if you want. Oh, there is one. Would SGL be considering partitioned systems, like mentioned before? You mean like splitting it into different elements, uh, like we do in the systems work group, I assume. Yeah, like in Zephyr etc. I don't know. Do you want to say on it, Ramon? Do you go currently
I'm not
for a
sure
native?
I
It's basically, do you consider virtualization RTOS, or Linux only things?
yeah, there's actually in the survey there's a question about this. So yes, there's the thought is that there we will be allowing virtualization under the Linux distribution, yes, but under how and when, that's still to be determined.
And I guess it can be interesting. This was at least at the Space Grade Linux workshop at Goddard. Was not directly on Xen Buffer, but it was at least also going into containers, but you can draw conclusions
Hmm.
from there. Where it says it can be interesting to have virtualization or containers, not the same technology, but to just split, like if you work with different teams and you have the computing performance, you can say, but this different VMs, different containers can enable multiple teams working on the same hardware, more or less independent. You get a certain, well, updatability. We didn't touch that much, but this was actually seen, and we had a nice embedded leadership meetup and one of the embedded Linux conference, and there was one proposal to say, we know Linux is in space, let us build a demonstrator. And there were a bunch of embedded Linux experts there, and the one proposing it to say, let's build a pure Linux one. Uh, actually got some pushback at there and say, why should we do everything with the Linux part? We have alternatives like an RTOS, which we should utilize so that we do a good split of what we want to achieve with which task and not simply try to put everything on Linux because we can, but we should make a good system composition. And especially if you have like microcontrollers on board next to the microprocessor, it can get you additional monitoring capabilities and so on. Also, options to utilize the Linux system on it from and controlling from the microcontroller. So I guess it's most likely something you will come across during the next year as the space grade Linux part. Otherwise, systems work group always open there to help.
Great, thank you, Philip.
Yeah, cool.
All right, well, thank you everyone for having me.
Thank you so much.